Hello everyone, Stormy Strike here, and welcome to my 10th annual Surprise Model Speculation video. That's right, this is the 10th time I've made a BreyerFest Surprise Model Speculation video, which is kind of mind-blowing honestly. Before I dive into this video, I have to give an update that I've already shared on social media a little while back, but in case you missed it, I have the unfortunate news that I will not be going to BreyerFest in person this year. It was a very difficult decision to make, but in the end, the big factors like how expensive, stressful, and draining BreyerFest can be overall just is too much this year. I'll of course be doing online BreyerFest, and if I have the time and energy, I'll try to maybe do some extra little fun online things for it. If I do end up planning any kind of online events, I will announce those closer to BreyerFest. I of course do plan to go back to BreyerFest in person at some point, but currently I have no idea when that will be. I'm really sorry to all of you that were expecting to see me or meet me at BreyerFest this year. I really hope that I'll be able to see you all again another time. Now back to the surprise model speculation video. The typical disclaimer that I do not currently work for Breyer as of making this video, I do not actually know what the surprise model is going to be, and all of the patterns and guesses in this video are based on public information. In this video, I use a lot of information from the website identifyyourbreyer.com, which is an amazing resource that I recommend supporting. This is not a sponsor, by the way. I've just been using Identify Your Breyer all the time for years for personal use in videos like this, and so I feel like it's worth mentioning. I also want to give a shout out to these three lovely people that I have some great conversations with on sharing insights, ideas, and speculations about the surprise model. They are all wonderful. Go give them a follow. In case you are curious what my track record for the surprise mold guesses has been, here is a chart of where each surprise model mold has ended up on my list of guesses based on my last list of guesses before BreyerFest each year. I'm noticing a funny pattern where my guess for the surprise is either very lucky to be number 1 or is number 3 or number 6 on my list. Now onto the surprise model rules. I've honestly been over these so many times now, and this hasn't really changed from last year, so I'm going to have all this information up on screen. Feel free to pause and read it if you need to, but otherwise I'm going to move on to the next part. Let's go over what the surprise model is called this year, which is Surprise Girls Run the World, and the logo is a colorful green, blue, and purple. The BreyerFest blog post about the surprise says, "You know we can't reveal the mold or colorways for this year's BreyerFest Special Run model, but we can tell you that she will be available to VIP, All Access, and online traditional access ticket holders." Now this year, I think it is an almost guarantee that the surprise model will be a mare, based on several very big clues. First off, the BreyerFest theme this year has been playing pretty heavily on mares and girl power. Secondly, the surprise is called Girls Run the World. This is the first time the surprise model name has had some indication of the gender of the model. While we did discover last year that the surprise model is often named by Kat McDermott without her seeing it, that doesn't mean she might not have had the information that it was going to be a mare, while still not actually seeing what the model or mold was going to be. Thirdly, they even refer to the model as she in this post. This isn't the first time that's happened either. In 2020, if I'm remembering correctly, there was a reference to the surprise model where they said she or her in one of the BreyerFest blog posts or updates about BreyerFest, and it ended up being accurate as the surprise model for that year was a mare. And lastly, out of the 14 different surprise models over the years, there have only been 2 mares. It would be kind of crazy if the surprise model wasn't a mare this year, with all of these different things pointing to it being a mare. Now, there is something to note though. You may think that because it's most likely going to be a mare, that would eliminate a lot of mold possibilities. Well, that isn't the case. In fact, this doesn't eliminate any more molds really than I normally would rule out, because Breyer has turned several molds that were stallions or geldings into mares before, and vice versa, and it is very likely that Breyer will do that again. Even just last year, the Othello mold, which has been around in plastic for 17 years now, was turned into a mare for the very first time for the release of Tilly. With that knowledge, we can't really rule out any molds based on their sex, even if they haven't been used as a mare before. All that being said, it is probably still likely that they will use a mold that has already been a mare before, overturning a mold into a mare for the first time, but I still would not rule them out doing that completely, which is why you are not going to see me eliminating molds based on the fact that they're a stallion or a gelding. Before I run through the mold eliminations, I just want to say that I have a feeling that Breyer might throw us a curveball this year, and possibly make the surprise model a mold that normally wouldn't fit into the pattern. And I'm not talking about molds that are really obvious no's, like molds that are very old and or not popular, or molds that are already being used for special runs this year. I'm talking about molds that are normally eliminated for being recently used. For this year, I am specifically talking about the molds Weather Girl, Yasmin, Bobby Joe, and the Connemara mare. All of these molds should technically be eliminated because they've been used this year, or for last year's BreyerFest, but I'm hesitant to totally count these ones out. Partly because they generally are a very good fit for the surprise model this year, based on things like popularity and fitting the general theme, and partly because I think Breyer is on to us. Breyer is pretty well aware of how dedicated some of us are in trying to figure out the surprise model, just like how they know how good a lot of us are at guessing molds based on just a little tiny sneak peek. In case you haven't noticed, Breyer has been making sneak peeks for models really hard to figure out the mold for these days. A lot of the sneak peeks are literally just a patch of color from like the model's barrel, which you can't really get a whole lot of information from, compared to other sneak peeks in the past where we've gotten glimpses at a mane or some kind of musculature that kind of gives away the mold a little better, or at least maybe the sculptor. Way back too, they even went as far as like doing the picture of the model just swirled or turned into a puzzle, but we don't see that anymore. So it just seems like now, a lot of the times, they're not giving us any easy hints, which is why I am really wondering if they are going to pick a mold. Well, they've technically already picked the mold a long time ago now, and it's been in production, if not already made at this point, but you get what I mean. If they picked a mold that will just completely derail one of the already established patterns for the surprise model. For the sake of not driving myself completely crazy in making this surprise mold guesses top 10 list and such, I'm not going to include these molds in my official list of guesses, but I am warning everyone now that I think any of these could be pattern breakers. I guess we'll call this list my list of pattern breaker guesses, and this is how I would order them. Number 4 being the Connemara mare, number 3 being Weather Girl, number 2 Yasmin, and number 1 Bobby Joe. Now for going through all the different molds, I'm doing it a little differently this year than what I've done before. I've changed up the marks and how I use them for crossing out molds. I now have 3 different colored X's that kind of explain more why a mold has been crossed out. Red means it is almost guaranteed not to be the surprise because it's already been a surprise model, or it is a mold that is already being used for this year's BreyerFest. This yellow or golden color means that it is likely not the surprise because it was used recently, either as a BreyerFest model last year or a recent release this year, like a new regular run or Collector Club web special and so on. Gray is very unlikely because of the mold just inherently not being a good mold choice for reasons like being an older mold, a foal, a other equine like zebra or donkey, or is just known for being extremely unpopular. Molds that don't have an X on them means they don't have some big reason that eliminates them. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are good candidates for being the surprise though. If they are not a good candidate for some reason, then I am going to mention and explain why. Now let's go through 11 slides of all the Breyer traditional scale molds. First slide, what is not crossed out is the American Saddlebred, an Andalusian mare. She's a good possibility. The Saddlebred though, I don't think they will use him because last year's surprise was also a Saddlebred. They usually don't repeat breeds or breed types for the following year of the surprise. Slide number 2 has the Arabian mare, who is a good possibility, as well as the Mustang mare, aka Forever Siege. The National Show Horse, or Rejoice, is kind of iffy. I think she's creeping too much into the category of being older and too unpopular. Slide number 3 has Boomerang and the Peruvian Paso on here, but I don't think either of them are very strong possibilities, based mostly on popularity. Slide number 4, the Proud Arabian Mare and Rain. They are also likely never to be surprise models, although I do think Pam being a surprise model would be one of the very few older molds that I could see Breyer using. As much as I doubt they're ever going to use an older mold, I didn't put a Gray X on her for this year because she could be a good possibility for this year specifically. The reason why I say that is because she is a popular mold despite her age, and I do think she'd just make a cool, unexpected surprise. This is not like Old Timer last year, okay? Old Timer's different because Old Timer's not nearly as popular as the Proud Arabian Mare is. As much as I think Rain would make a really cool surprise model, especially for this year's girl power theme, and I just love Rain, but realistically, she's never going to be a surprise because a lot of people really do not like her and don't like the cartoony horses in general. So while I did not eliminate her, she probably kind of is just a mold that's never going to be a surprise. Slide number 5. Cigar is another one I don't think we'll ever see as a surprise model at this point. There were a few years I thought he had a pretty good chance, but I don't know. While he's still fairly popular, he is getting up there in age. If the surprise model is a newer mold again this year and not an older one, then I think I will start eliminating molds like him and the National Show Horse, who are technically considered vintage molds now. Also on the slide are Destato and Ruffian, who I think are both good possibilities. Slide number 6, there's nothing here unless we break the pattern and say that Yasmin, like I mentioned earlier. Slide number 7, a lot on this one. Frisian Sport Horse or Vermeer. Gaming Stock Horse or Wyatt, Georg, Show Jumper, Silver, and Smart Chicolina. Some of these are more possible than others. I highly doubt Silver will be the surprise for a few reasons. One is that he is getting on the older side. However, he is very popular, so maybe his popularity will counteract that. He's especially not that likely for this year, I feel like, since he was a Gambler's Choice model just last year for the Vintage Club. And the last reason is a pattern I actually more recently noticed, which is he's been a BreyerFest Special Run 5 times in the past. That is quite a lot. All of the past surprise model molds, and all the ones I have on my top 10 list actually, have 0 to 2 special runs at BreyerFest in the past. Again, Silver's popularity may make him immune to these reasons, but I think he's another one that's kind of drifting into the territory of he probably won't ever be a surprise model. I could be wrong though. Again, he's so popular that maybe they will use him. Oh, by the way, on Vermeer, he was a Glossy Collector Club Appreciation model this month, and I actually don't know if the Collector Club Appreciation models have an effect on the surprise or not. That's a little bit up in the air, so that's why he didn't get a yellow X, even though, in a way, he had a new release this year. Slide number 8. A lot on here too. There's Gofford, Brishan, Spanish Stallion, Spirit, and Standing Thoroughbred. Spirit is like Rain and Boomerang. Not very likely because of not being popular, because of being a cartoony horse. Slide number 9, Huckleberry Bay, Strapless, and Secession. Huck is another one that I think is never going to happen as a surprise. He is getting to be too old, and like with Silver, he had a Gambler's Choice release just last December, so I think that really makes him not all that likely for this year. Secession is another one that I think is unlikely just for the fact that she's never been released without being a set that comes with her foal. If the price of the surprise model had went up in cost to like $100, then I'd be more inclined to guess that it would be a mare and foal set this year. Also, if there wasn't already another mare and foal set special run in the lineup. And of course, you may think, well, they could make the surprise just Secession without Lay Fire. And that is totally true. They could do that. It just seems unlikely with how she's always with Lay Fire. There really hasn't been another mare mold out there like this, where they are very determined to keep her with a foal. All of the other mares that have been initially released with a foal have later gotten released by themselves at least once. So it is just kind of unusual that she seems destined to always be with a foal. Slide number 10, Volegro, Walking Thoroughbred, and Warmblood Stallion. I don't think any of these are super strong possibilities, but I wouldn't completely rule any of them out either. Lastly is slide number 11, with the Lipperzanner mare as a good possibility, Marabella, Wixom, and Zippo Pine Bar are all ones I feel like will probably never be a surprise, honestly, due to age and popularity. Of the three, Wixom is probably the most likely because she seems like a still pretty popular mold, but I don't know, I feel like her size too does deter her from being the surprise. Which I know they've done a big kind of chunky draft horse before with the Cleveland Bay, so it's not completely impossible, but she is like even bigger and heavier than him, I think. So here's a list of all the molds that weren't completely eliminated by the X's, and as you can see, that's a pretty long list. So let's cut that down by cutting out all the molds I already talked about were not good possibilities for one reason or another. Now we have a bit shorter list, but we need to make it even shorter to be the top 10 and honorable mentions. As usual, deciding which models to make this list and put them in order was not easy, and my order of them honestly could change from day to day. We will start off with the honorable mentions. We have Desatato, who doesn't have anything particular holding him back from being the surprise, other than I'm pretty sure he's never been a mare mold yet. But despite that, he's kind of a good possibility. On to the second honorable mention, which is Goffert. Now, Goffert has been a mare before, which heightens the chances there. However, Goffert hasn't been used since the live auction in 2021 or the 2022 regular run decorator, which means for that reason alone is why I put Goffert in the honorable mentions. If Goffert had had a release last year, I would have bumped this model way up high on this list probably. Also to note that Goffert is starting to get up there in age. It is nearing the vintage milestone. Now onto the top 10. Starting off with number 10, Firefly, or the Standing Quarter Horse Mare. I originally had this girl a little higher up on my list, but then I remembered something that is a potential pattern for the surprise, which is that as of yet, all of the surprise model molds have been in motion in some way. There's never been a mold that's just standing still. They've all had something dynamic about them going on. I do wonder if this is something they do on purpose. Perhaps Breyer may very well pick out molds that are more dynamic and therefore maybe seem a little more exciting for the surprise model compared to a model that is just, quietly standing there. Aside from the fact that her pose is maybe a little too unexciting to be the surprise model, she's actually not a bad candidate, which is why I had her make the top 10. Number 9, Emerson, or the Standing Thoroughbred, who has the same problem as Firefly, which is that it is a mold that is standing. I'd argue that this mold is a lot more popular than Firefly right now though, which is why it claims the spot above her. If I wasn't taking the mold pose into consideration, then I would have this mold a lot higher up on the list, considering it's been a mare before. And again, I think it's a pretty popular mold. There is another thing about this mold that makes it less possibility, which I'll talk about with the next mold, which is Totalis. I don't know how you say its name. I honestly keep forgetting that this mold has had a mare version of it done already. This mold is not higher up on the list because I just generally don't feel like it's a crazy strong possibility for some reason. But there is also the other reason, which is that warm blood models I think are less likely for this year to be the surprise model, purely for the fact that there are already 2 other warm blood models in the special run lineup this year. I'm obviously not ruling out the warm bloods completely, but that is something I'm taking in consideration in ranking these models, and so models I would have ranked higher, I ended up ranking lower because of this. Number 7, Mustang Mare, or Forever Siege. I would have this mold ranked a lot higher on this list if it weren't for a different kind of issue, which is its popularity. When this mold came out, it was very disliked by a lot of the hobby. I feel like she has gained a lot more popularity since then, which may have redeemed this mold, but I don't know if it's redeemed her enough to be the surprise model. I'm really not sure. If she was more popular, she would have made it a lot higher on this list. I really like Ruffian, and personally, if I could choose out of all these molds on this list, which one I wish was the surprise model if I could easily afford to buy tons of the surprise model, then it would be Ruffian here. However, she has 3 different things that make her not the perfect candidate for the surprise. I honestly probably should have put her a lot lower on this list, but her pretty strong popularity and maybe a bit of my own bias had made me place her here. First off, the perhaps most noticeable one is that she is a warm blood, as I mentioned, and that probably makes her less likely for this year. Secondly is her mold age, which is starting to enter questionable territory. Ruffian is currently 18 years old. As of thus far, the oldest mold that's been used as a surprise model relative to the year of BreyerFest that it came out, if that makes sense, has been 16 years old with the Cleveland Bay in 2022. And lastly, Ruffian hasn't had a release since 2021, which also starts to get a little questionable. Again, it's not unheard of for there to be a 3-year gap in releases, as we saw also with the Cleveland Bay, but 6 months to 2 years is much more common. Number 5, Strapless. This girl has 2 of the same problems as Ruffian, which are that she is a warm blood and that she is getting up there in age. She is in fact older than Ruffian at 21 years old. She seems to be pretty popular though. I'd argue maybe even more popular than some of the other molds I'm going to talk about next. If this mold is used as the surprise, it does have the fun benefit of having different hair options that can be used for the variations, which that's always fun. Number 4, Oasis, or the Arabian Mare, also commonly known as Make-A-Wish or S Just a Dream. This mold is one that has the potential for not just changes to the mane and tail if it's used as the surprise, but of course the whole head and neck too. Something that is very questionable about this model is its popularity. This mold was super popular for a while, particularly with younger collectors, and I think that was honestly because of YouTube, because a lot of YouTubers were using this mold in videos, and big YouTubers like HoneyHeartsC or HoneyHearts123 at the time could have influenced even more casual collectors to want to buy models on this mold. However, I feel like this mold's popularity has went down quite a bit in recent years. This is a mold that has biomechanical issues, especially the head-down version, that steers some serious showing collectors away from her. I do think there's still a lot of people out there that like her and collect her though, and I think secondhand prices for models on this mold are generally still pretty high. However, a probably more worrisome thing about this mold other than popularity on whether or not she's used is the fact that she hasn't had like a release, actual release since 2020. 4 years feels like a big stretch. 3 years is more doable. So then you're probably wondering, well, why do I have her this high up on the list and not a lot further down? And that is because she was used in the BreyerFest live auction last year. I don't take the BreyerFest live auction into too much consideration, but I do take maybe just a little bit of it into consideration, which is why she isn't at the bottom of the list. Although, take that with a grain of salt, because seriously, by the time this video comes out, I'm going to want to rearrange all the molds places on this list again because it is just so hard to tell. Anyway, let's get into the top 3. Number 3, the Andalusian Mare. I actually had this mold even higher up on the list at first, but then thinking about this mold's popularity, I thought, maybe not, because she doesn't seem quite that popular. Breyer seems to generally use molds that aren't just well-liked by a lot of the hobby, but molds that people are really in love and crazy about. This is of course not always the case. Giselle, I would argue, has probably about the same popularity as the Andalusian Mare, which is to say that she's well-liked. Most people generally don't seem to dislike this mold, but I just don't see that raving excitement for this mold that a lot of people have over other molds Breyer has used for the surprise, for example like Hamilton and Dundee and even the Cleveland Bay. I'm sure this mold has its diehard fans, but they seem to be rather quiet. Other than the popularity factor, there's not really anything stopping this mold from being used. Number 2, the Lipizzaner Mare. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, I'm sorry. This is another one where I kind of question its popularity. I think it might be a little more popular than the Andalusian Mare. I don't really know why I get that feeling, but that's just my guess. Maybe it's because she's had another regular run release than the Andalusian Mare. But anyway, she's another that I think is well-liked, but I don't see this super crazy love for her like I see for some other molds. But maybe Breyer wants to alternate it a bit and not do insanely popular molds each year. Maybe they want to do something more like Giselle or Cleveland Bay that is popular but not the raving popularity as some others. Oh, and I almost forgot. Another thing that bumps this mold up a little bit for me over the Andalusian Mare is, again, if I were to take the live auction pattern into consideration, she was used as a live auction model last year. Now for my number 1 guess, Gaming Stock Horse, aka Wyatt. This is another mold where I sometimes forget that we have seen a mare version of it before. This mold doesn't really have anything that holds it back from being the surprise model, except for one maybe possible thing, which is that it has a stand. Breyer has used a model with a stand before for the surprise, so it's definitely not out of the question and hasn't affected my list of guesses too much here. But I don't know if that may or may not come into play on their decision to use a mold. Otherwise, this mold has nothing holding it back. It's got a dynamic pose that is different from the one of last year's. It's had recent releases, including a current regular run. It's had 2 BreyerFest Special Run releases prior, but that's not too many releases for them to still use it as a surprise. I feel like this mold is very popular too. It doesn't quite have the popularity to something like Hamilton or Fireheart, probably partly because some collectors just don't like models with stands at all. But this generally seems to be a pretty well-loved mold overall, perhaps even more loved than like half of the molds on this list. So I'm kind of putting all of that in consideration, especially in regards to popularity. I decided that Wyatt would be my top guess for this year. However, unless that changes right before BreyerFest with new releases, which is possible, if there are any new releases before BreyerFest that happen to drastically change this list, then I will do a YouTube short like I did last year that gives a new updated list. So yeah, there's my top guesses for the surprise model this year, and then the 4 outliers that I think could be pattern breakers. I'm honestly not feeling super confident on my list of guesses this year for kind of just various reasons. So again, take the order, especially of this list, with a grain of salt. I do feel like one of these molds that you see listed on screen currently will be the surprise, but the likelihood of which one it's going to be, I am really waffling on. As always though, I want to know what you think. Let me know in the comments which mold you think the surprise model will be this year. Also, feel free to make any guesses about its colors too. I decided to not really discuss colors this time around in this video. I don't really have much input other than I wouldn't be surprised if they do a decorator variation that continues with this colorful 90s vibe going on. But yeah, otherwise I don't have too many thoughts on the colors. If you happen to be watching this video shortly after it came out and you want a chance to win a free Breyer model, be sure to check out my 15th anniversary video that's coming out on May 21st. Thank you for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye everyone!